talk to me about this potential deal between the U.S. and the U.K. Obviously, as you know, this has been years in the making. Should investors view this as good news today?
It is years in the making. I think it's going to be underwhelming as a first opening salvo, but it is a perfect encapsulation of exactly what we should expect from the White House for the next couple of months. Is like these really small trade agreements and trade deals. The UK-US trade is 3% of our overall trade in the United States. This has the potential to be really important for UK auto manufacturers. So if you're looking to buy a Bentley or an Aston Martin, congratulations, this might be helpful to you. But for the most part, we're not even clear on whether this will remove the 10% tariff that President Trump put on Liberation Day across the globe. So there are some components here that are helpful in that, obviously the president is signaling that he's willing to finally sit down and start signing something, if in fact that happens today. But there are much bigger pieces of this pie that I think the market has been hoping for. When I talk to my clients, they're looking for deals with South Korea, with Japan, with Canada and Mexico, our two largest trading partners, understanding that China is a very long way off, but there are much bigger fish to fry. And this is a really small guppy, and we need more, quite frankly.
Well, Henrietta, given what you point out that the U.S. and the U.K. do have a friendlier relationship, is that potentially a signal that we could have a deal sooner than currently seems possible with a partner like Canada, a partner like Mexico that we have had friendlier relations with in the past?
I've actually been taking, and distinct from this UK-US deal, I've been taking a different approach to Canada and Mexico than my priors. I had been really optimistic that Canada and Mexico would be some of the first tariffs to come off. They are our closest trading partners. They are our actual neighbors. We've got the issues of fentanyl and immigration largely resolved. Regular communication with both leaders of both nations. Those tariffs are incredibly pernicious and creating massive log jams at customs and border across all of Canada and all of Mexico, which is, effectively equal to the transatlantic trade and trans-Pacific trade. So I've been really optimistic that we would get the Canada and Mexico tariffs off in 1 to 3 months. We're already almost 1.5, 2 months in on those original USMCA 10% fentanyl tariffs.
Yeah.
And we are nowhere on negotiating an exclusion from the 25% USMCA tariffs. And of course, the president negotiated that trade deal during his first term. And as we saw from his meeting with Carney earlier this week, has no intentions of taking that off. So while there is a deal with our close partner in the UK, I'm not seeing the same. And I'm having to push out my forecast for clients into, instead of 1 to 3 months, maybe a 3 to 6 month breakthrough with those two nations.
And Henrietta, my guest host, Keith Lerner, has a question for you.
Henrietta, thanks so much. I don't envy your position. Things are moving so quickly. As I'm meeting with a lot of our business clients, the question they have is, when are we going to get clarity? I know no one knows that, but if we think forward, say 6 months from now, do you think a lot of this will have some of that clarity, or do you think this is going to just be an ongoing thing where it's going to be even longer than, say, 6 months from now, knowing how the overall tariff will play out across the globe?
Yeah, that's a good question. We have a lot of events that are going to happen within that 1 to 6 month period. So, for example, as y'all were just talking about, the semiconductor tariffs, 232 and 301, are going to go into effect. That comment period ends next week, I believe. So we're going to get an uptick in semiconductor tariffs somewhere in that 6 month range. We're going to get the imposition of pharmaceutical tariffs in that 6 month range. We're going to see an escalation on copper, uranium, critical minerals, and a whole host of other products and chemicals as well. And then think about the nations that we could actually hash a deal out with. I mentioned South Korea moments ago. They don't even have a president, and they won't have their election until next month. So there's not an opportunity to get a deal with South Korea before they have a confirmed leader, as Secretary Besson is learning in real time right now. And I think that that's going to be the case with our other largest trading partners. I think the best piece of silver lining I can find is to say that we'll probably have a deal with Japan, which would be constructive. I suspect we might be almost finalized with the South Korea deal within 6 months. I think India is very far away. 6 months would be the earliest that I would anticipate that. We have 19 different segments of the US and India economies that we need to negotiate in that period. And Canada and Mexico, those negotiations aren't set to be finalized until July of 2026. So it's distinctly possible that at least the 25% tariffs on 40% of trade between Canada, Mexico, and the United States will be with us for that entire now, additional 12, 13, 14-month period. And so what that leaves us with in the rest of the globe is very small scale deals. The one that I was actually anticipating being announced today, which I think is interesting that it's not, is with less than 1% of our trading partners. And that would be a deal with Peru, the Dominican Republic, and Colombia. Those negotiations between the USTR and his assistants have been occurring. They went to Bogota last week. I was hopeful that we might get a deal there, even if it's de minimis. I think it's 0.8% of U.S. trade with those three nations, but signaling forward progress on the 96 different countries that Trump has had negotiations with all at the same time. So 6 months from now, I'm hopeful that a fraction of the tariffs could be off, but a lot of this uncertainty plus additional tariffs from what we've seen now, compounded by the trans-shipping and cargo issues we're seeing, means that the U.S. economy is going to be in the heat of the trade wars, I think, 6 months from now, as opposed to on the back end.
And Henrietta, we're getting some headlines in right now. This is coming from The Telegraph, reporting that the U.S. will cut tariffs on UK-made cars to 10%. So getting some of these headlines trickling in that we are expected to get clarity on when the president does speak in hopefully a few moments here. Henrietta, how much of a lift is that headline in your view off the back of this news? Again, the U.S. cutting tariffs on UK-made cars to 10%, according to The Telegraph. Is that needle moving?
I mean, I'm not in the market for a Bentley personally, so this doesn't help me. But it is something. I think that the best takeaway for investors right now is that this is signaling that President Trump is, in fact, ready to sign something and to reach deals. We need that logjam to break. This is the first one. It makes perfect sense that it would be with London. So let's get the show on the road.
Well, I'm curious then about the headlines that we're hearing in terms of potential EU retaliation targeting U.S. cars, planes, and bourbon if these negotiations fail. Is that a threat that has teeth to it, or is the fact that we're already hearing news of potential negotiations and deal making here a sign that we're not going to get to that point?
I was remiss in not including the EU in my earlier rundown before. I apologize. Think about what's happening with the UK right now. Our biggest issue with the UK and with the EU is trade and agriculture. That's something that's been a problem for us for a century. They don't want our genetically modified products. They have different sanitary standards for shipping over of soybeans, poultry, beef, all kinds of components. Now, the UK reached a deal with us on cars because they have to reach a deal with the EU on agriculture trade. And if they reach a substandard deal with us, with the United States on ag trade, that undercuts their negotiations with the European Union on ag, which is more important to them. So it's a really notable development that the US and the UK are focused on Aston Martins when really what we need is the farming access, and that's not going to be coming. And I think that's what you're hearing right now.